Last term I taught Essentials of Engineering to freshmen, and I was looking at the web. I hadn't looked at it since last spring, middle of spring, and I go to this one thing at the very beginning, and the graduate TA, my student who had basically put the stuff on the web for me, he made up, or he didn't make it up, this is something I've been saying for years, but I was a little surprised to see it on the web, where anyone can see it. It says that, it got attributed to me. It says, MIT takes some of the best raw material in the world, raw talent in the world, and turns them into high-class technicians. I've been saying that. 15 years ago, I said that to the Engineering Council, and I just like to lob these bombshells, into meetings. But it's true. MIT takes very, very intelligent people, and they teach them how to do the technology. They don't teach them how to be leaders. You don't graduate from this place with the attitude that you're the best in the world and you're going to be the Secretary of Defense, or you're going to be the Secretary of State, or you're going to be a CEO. Now, a lot of students do it, but you don't get it from here, okay? I mean, some of the students do this, and actually it's fairly impressive. 8 out of the last 13 Nobel laureates this year, or 8 out of 13 Nobel laureates this year, had some affiliation with MIT. Only one of them is still here, but the other 7 were either students here, or faculty here, or Kofi Annan is a graduate of the Sloan Senior Executives Program, things like that. So, anyway, you get a lot of the world's best and brightest come through here, but we don't necessarily tell them that you've got to be, that you're special and you ought to do something special. Or the way I put it, I talked about legacy students, didn't I? At the Ivy League schools admit 3 classes of students: scholars, athletes, and legacy students. And legacy students are sons and daughters of wealthy alums. And in fact, one student, one graduate of Harvard, told me, she said that she was surprised to learn when she went there, she was actually one of the scholars, I guess, that 45% or something of her class were legacy students. And I used to explain, oh, that's right, you're a Harvard grad.
So which one are you?
I got recruited.
You got recruited? Oh, okay. So you're an athlete. Okay. But I know stories. In fact, I read in the Boston Globe, this one guy said, well, my freshman roommate didn't seem to be very, this is at Harvard, my freshman roommate didn't seem to be very bright, but he's a great hockey goalie. And he never went to class much after freshman year. Okay? And I remember talking to this one person, we were driving down Star Drive together, and he was telling me how there's a building at Harvard named after his grandfather. His grandfather had been fairly wealthy, and he said someone asked him once how his sister got into Harvard, because she really wasn't that bright. He says because no other school would admit her. That's how she got into Harvard. There are only 2 schools that would be a legacy student. There's only 2 schools that I know of that only admit scholars, and that's MIT and Caltech. There's a serious problem with that at the undergraduate level. And look, my oldest son went to Princeton, so they had, I remember going to the little mixer for the Princeton students, and they give you a name tag, they'll say P62, D93, G46. It means grandparent graduated in 46 from Princeton, parent graduated in 62, daughter graduated in 93. It's like a general wearing medals on the chest, But they give you name tags. So here's my son and myself there, and we didn't have any medals. Now I got a medal. I got a S, son from whatever it was, 98, 99 or something. So I can walk around with pride at Princeton. In any case, the problem for MIT students is, 48% of the freshman class were valedictorians in their high school, but the problem for them now is they come here and they were used to comparing themselves with other people academically, because why not? You win, right? When you're number 1, right? And the problem here is, on average, they're average. And MIT doesn't like to admit it, and the administration will say that's not right when I make this next statement. It was different. They have a little different. They have a different spin on it. But they did a study of seniors, and basically it showed that when seniors graduate from MIT, they have a lower self-esteem than when they came here. Okay. Now that's not necessarily. You can say that's not necessarily all bad. Most of you need to be humbled.
I have a lower self-esteem since coming to
You've lowered your self-esteem since coming to MIT?
I have, absolutely.
Okay.
Just lowered it, I've had it lowered.
I think it's
This was not necessarily the welding of aluminum lecture today. I did actually prepare it, but this is actually maybe more important. I came here in awe of MIT. I mean, yeah, I was recruited. Actually, I wasn't recruited by MIT. In fact, MIT didn't give me early admission. I was recruited by Harvard, okay? But mostly because no one from my little high school in the South had ever heard of Harvard or MIT or anything like that. I mean, you know, just the world's greatest school was the University of Virginia, right? I grew up, you know, I went to graduate school in Virginia. And all, you know, wow, if you could get into the University of Virginia, you must really be great. And in Virginia, University of Virginia is not bad in many ways, particularly if you want to drink. Hey, one of my closest friends in high school got a great big scholarship and drank himself out in the first semester and lost his scholarship. Anyway, it turns out, where's that going? Oh, I can't remember what it was. Low self-esteem. I came here in awe of the place and just think, wow, MIT is really great. And I then started working for these doctoral students, and well, actually my self-esteem lowered even more. The very first week, they put us in Kresge Auditorium. This was freshman orientation back then. And they said, we used to, back in the 1950s, we used to say, look to your right, look to your left, one of the three of you won't be here next year, okay? We used to weed out the freshman class. And they said, ha ha ha, but we don't say that anymore. So they flash up the College Board scores, right? The profile of the class. Now, I thought I was pretty good. I had a perfect 800 on my math, right? And of course, I was the only person in my high school. Actually, one guy who went to Georgia Tech had higher SATs in my high school. But nonetheless, I was pretty, pretty good in my high school, right? I wasn't valedictorian, but I had done pretty well. And I come here and they flash up these scores, and I might not have been very bright, but I was good enough in math to realize I was in the bottom third of my entering class at MIT that first week. And I remember going back and going up to the house tutor and saying, "What am I going to do? You know, I got into the wrong environment here. I'm a really small fish in a really big pond." He says, "Don't worry about it. Just study this first year, pass, fail. You'll do just fine. All these other people at advanced placed their first 3 years at MIT because they went to some special technical school. They're not going to learn how to study, and by sophomore year, they're going to be floundering." And he was absolutely right. So I learned how to study freshman year, and they didn't, and I actually got through this place all right. But then, so anyway, so the freshman year I was in awe of the place. By my junior year, I used to say, "What's the big deal?" I mean, I saw so many boners done in the lab, okay? I could go on for hours about people who had done stupid experiments. This one guy was doing radio frequency superconductivity, finished his master's thesis, graduated, until the next guy came along who happened to be my house tutor and noticed that this resonant peak he got was at WBZ, the local radio station, right? There was this other guy who was milling of high temperature powders, and he put the powders in with these stainless steel balls, and you just kind of roll them around, and it crushed the falling balls, crushed the powder over a month at a time. And he thought it was great. He put in so many grams, and he got 30% more out. And he made up his alloy and extruded it. He had 30% stainless steel in his alloy because the balls had deteriorated, you know. But he didn't stop to think, where did the 30% increase in weight come from? He thought he had a great new process. Because, there was another student at MIT that was studying bone, okay? This is arthritic bone. We take rabbits and we built this machine to thump the rabbit's legs while they're alive, and then you sacrifice the rabbit, and you slice the bone up, and you look at how osteoarthritis starts. Okay, my thesis advisor won a great big award from the Orthopedic Surgeons Society for this, to understand how rabbit bone breaks down. And so this guy got a doctoral degree, and he had a 1,000-watt amplifier. Okay, he had piezoelectric crystals, and he put this slice of bone between there, and he resonated, and he had this computer model of the structure of the bone and the mechanical properties of the bone as the cellular structure of the bone would break down with arthritis. And so he graduates, and then this young woman comes by, and my thesis advisor says, "Oh, go do your master's thesis following on his work." And so Wendy goes up, sets up the equipment, and finds you don't need a bone sample and a device to be able to get the resonance peaks. Okay? Okay? These are true stories now of the great science at MIT. And one of the ones I liked best, I was a young assistant professor, and I was in charge of putting together the general exams. My second year here, this is back in the 70s. And this other professor on the general exam question had the students design certain types of furnaces for heat treating a metal, heat treating a ceramic, and things. And here's this graduate student. Now this particular graduate student is taking the doctoral exam the second time around. And anyway, so the answers come back, and I divvy them back out to the professors who wrote the questions. And this one professor, who's no longer here but now at Harvard Business School, calls me up and he says, "You're pulling my leg. You wrote this question." He thought this was a joke because the student had an oil-fired vacuum system. He had a big oil flame shooting into this vacuum system. Now, what's burning if you don't have any oxygen around, right? I mean, he had a picture of it. There was the flame. He was going to fire this furnace with oil, and he had oil shooting into the vacuum chamber. Now, you keep things from corroding that way, but you won't generate a lot of heat. He didn't pass general exams, he didn't get his doctorate, but so we do have some standards. Anyway, so I left this place saying, so what's the big deal? I came here in awe, saying, wow, this is really great. I left here saying, what's the big deal? And then I took a job in industry, and then within 2 months, I said to myself, aha, it's all relative. Okay? So you get, this is a very distorted perspective being at MIT, and you have to remember that. Okay? So yes, you lost some self-esteem when you came here. Probably not bad to be humbled once in your life. When you go out there in the real world again, you can build it back up, right? And that's what.
Can you pull your degree back to figure out a couple years later that your research is completely screwed up?
Who knows? There was, I don't know. They
say that actually an Ivy League education or education like this doesn't matter. Most corporate CEOs and stuff like that go to the state schools. Right?
Well, that's because most of the people go to the state schools.
Wow.
And so I actually think, I used to tell the students at MIT that there's a certain advantage to having these legacy students, because then the students at Princeton, and Harvard, and Yale, and Stanford have someone to compare themselves to. It's true. And they don't lose their self-esteem, right?
I agree.
Yeah, I figured this out. I didn't even go to Harvard. Now I have testimony of Harvard grad, right?
15 engineers that graduate every year.
Right. You
Somewhere
know,
between 8 and 15. Everybody else drops out and majors in folklore or mythology or something really in depth like that.
yeah, so all these jokes in Tank McNamara about, you know, all the bogus courses that the athletes take and stuff, you know. And there's a lot to be said for having high self-esteem and coming out and knowing you can do something, rather than being beaten down and taught that you're not so great. Fortunately for most MIT students, you get out there in the real world, you realize you really are exceptional. And in fact, to quantify it, MIT freshmen are in the top 3 out of 10,000 academically in the country. Now, if you realize that only about 1/4 of the MIT students can get into MIT graduate school, those of you that are graduate students at MIT, that makes you 1 out of 10,000. Pretty good, huh? Yeah, raise your hand up. Pat yourself on the back. You're pretty exceptional. Well, no, you know, it's the difference between right brain and left brain to a certain extent on some of those Sloan School versus the engineering school. But anyway, my statement still stands. MIT takes some of the best raw talent in the world and turns them into high-class technicians because they're very good at solving problems. I mean, they can go solve the best of function problems, right? You learn how to solve best of functions, right?
I learned that before I came here, but
Okay.
at one time I could solve a best.
But you probably learned it from some guy some professor who was a student at MIT or something at one point. I mean, that was one of the big deals. MIT produced something like 15% of all the engineering professors in the country. Okay, so we really do have an influence on things. What I'd like to do is change it so that, yes, we work you hard and you learn the fundamentals, but that you also learn that you are the leaders for the future. You are the people who actually know the technology and understand the technology, and you don't want to get some liberal arts graduate, not anything wrong with liberal arts graduates, but some liberal arts graduate who's going to repeal the laws of physics by fiat, is the way I'd say, okay? And I saw that in industry. You know, we had when I worked at Bethlehem Steel, there was a problem of rusting rebar in the highway bridges. You still see highway bridges always being repaired during the summers, right? On the highways. Well, where else would you repair a highway bridge except on the highway? So you're driving down the Mass Pike and they close off the bridge, and what's happening is the salt from the roads percolates down, corrodes the rebar, the iron oxide expands, cracks the concrete, and they have to repair these things. Well, some manager at Bethlehem Steel had decided that, well, we should make stainless steel clad rebar, because rebar was one of Bethlehem's products. And so they had this idea, and at Bethlehem Steel actually had a notebook. This is another sign of a great dying company. Okay? And a notebook that was 1 inch thick that was the rules of who could write to whom in the company. Okay? I mean, I could write a letter to my supervisor, or I could write a letter to my technician, but I couldn't write a letter to my supervisor's boss. Except I could write it, but the salutation or the signature had to come from my supervisor. And down in the CC, down there, it would actually have my name as the author, so someone could look down there and see who really did it. But you could only go one level above or below. And when you went from the research department to the sales engineering department or the finance department, you could only go at the same levels. Okay? So a manager could write to a manager, or a senior manager could write to a senior manager, but you couldn't write. In your own organization, you could go one step above or below. In other cross organizations, you could only go at the same level. Isn't this great? Great communications. We had a communications protocol. It was that thing. Anyway, so that's a good sign of a company that's run amok. But anyway, so this manager in sales engineering tells the manager in research, why don't you think about stainless steel clad rebar? So it comes down to the research organization and have some engineers. They get a pre-project on it. They look at it and say, no, won't work. Too many stainless steel is not resistant to chloride cracking, stress corrosion cracking. You'd have to use nickel-based superalloys, way too expensive. Moves back up. The manager writes back and says, good idea, but it won't work. So the two managers go to lunch at the fancy, senior executive's lunchroom. I never saw strawberries that big before. I mean, just great opulence. I mean, it's okay. And they decided, well, forget what the engineers say, let's do it anyway. So we spent $500,000, which back in the mid-70s was actually a fair amount of money, making this stuff that all the engineers knew was not going to work. And they put it in test, and they found it didn't work. But because two managers got together over a fancy lunch and decided it was something that should be done, in spite of 6 months of evaluation by some engineers who said it was a dumb idea, that's the type of problem that you have in the real world, where you have managers who are repealing the laws of physics by fiat. Because it was their idea. Forget the science. Let's just go ahead and do it. And now think about it. How demoralizing was that for the engineers who had to work on it? My office mate was working on that project. He knew it was a waste of time. The other 10 engineers who were working on the project knew it was a waste of time. So okay, at that point, you're just working, I mean, you already gave your advice and it was refused. So at that point, you're just doing your job to earn a paycheck. Okay? So you gotta listen to people. If you actually have the technical knowledge and the ability to evaluate things and not have these other morons take over the technology of the world. Okay? You are the ones who are going to have to be the leaders, and you're going to have to learn how to communicate these things. And don't call them morons to their faces. Only in class when it's on the web.
Nobody has
I'll talk about aluminum on Monday, I guess.
Luckily,
But today's class is probably more important than some of the others.